Good morning, and welcome to Lopes on Movies. Today we're going to do something a little different than usual. I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Thomas Leitch, a professor of English and Film Studies here at UD, about a wide range of topics, from the future of film, the role of film in modern culture, and the works of Alfred Hitchcock. Professor Leitch is a true film expert and one of the greatest teachers I've ever been lucky enough to have, so I'm extremely excited to share this conversation with you all for the show. Today's episode will be part one of the conversation, with the second part airing next week. Hope you all enjoy. I think the first thing I kind of want to talk about is more general stuff, just because it's been so long since I've taken one of your classes now. It's been like 5 years since I was in one of them, I guess, which, believe me, is pretty shocking to me, I'm sure, as much as it is to you.
I'm sorry, Joey. I get older every day, but I always assume that while my back is turned, other people stay exactly the same.
Right, exactly. Well, actually, that's funny because having worked at the university for a couple of years now, really ever since I graduated, I've been working there, and it's been interesting seeing all the students stay the same age, even though I'm getting older, which I have to imagine is a experience that professors have as well.
That is half the weird experience. The other half is in the collective memory of the university. A generation is 4 years.
Yeah, exactly.
After 5 years, people have no idea what was happening 5 years ago. Nobody does. Maybe
Yeah.
elderly graduate students.
Yeah, but well, that's funny too, because like just thinking about like how quickly the culture changes at a university with like the 4 years, all the students are different. It feels like over the past 5 years, the general kind of media and culture landscape has already changed dramatically from where it was when I was in college. And I think that's interesting, and I'm kind of curious how that's affected some of the classes you've taught. Like, how are students different now from like 5 years ago, or even a little bit further back than that?
Well, one really obvious thing to say is that students are much more invested in their online lives than they used to be. And
Hmm.
consequently, they're less invested in the lives that they're living in what I think is meat space.
Hmm.
It used to be, for instance, that before I started a class, before every day before every session of a class, I'd go in and people would be sitting around and they would talk. They'd be talking
Hmm.
to each other, and if I talked to them, they would talk back to me. Now that never
Sure.
happens. People are always
Really?
online, checking their messages, tweeting to each other, texting more than tweeting, um,
Hmm.
and they put down the devices for the class, but I'm keenly aware of the fact that the class is an interruption in what's basically the ongoing life that they're living.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know the play, Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot.
Yeah, I'm aware of it. I've actually never like read it or seen it though.
Well, the gimmick, of course, is that these two guys, Vladimir and Estragon, are waiting for Godot, but he never shows up. And
Right. Yeah.
basically 2 acts of trying to pass the time till
Hmm.
Godot comes along. The play was, I think, first staged in 1954. And in the past few years, I thought Godot could never write this play now because Didi and Gogo wouldn't just be waiting for Godot. Didi and, yeah, right, Gogo would not be waiting for Godot to show up. They'd be checking their mail or playing Angry
Hmm.
Birds or,
Hmm.
tweeting out to their buds, where's
Hmm.
Godot? Oh, he's 5 miles away. Now he's 4.8 miles away, and so on. Um, and that made me wonder when Beckett first wrote the play, television was first becoming big.
Hmm.
And I wondered, did Beckett think television is a killer of leisure time and we need to celebrate emptiness in a way that we
Hmm.
didn't used to? Can't check with Beckett, he's dead, and he and I didn't move in the same circles anyway. But this is one way that I really think a lot about the way that students have changed, that their
Hmm.
lives are basically organized around social media, and
Hmm.
everything else is really an interruption.
Sure.
That may not
Yeah.
be true, but that's my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, that kind of checks out with what I've experienced just with my own like habits and like my own like interactions with friends that I have, because like obviously you're right. Like if I'm waiting for something, I'm just going to be on my phone the whole time. Um, and I do feel like I can recall when I would sit in your classes like before the class would start. Like even then, people would be on their computers or their phones or whatever. But I can recall like little conversations or just like things occurring, and eventually like talking to you. If you came in a little early, we would ask you a question or something. But that's interesting to see that it's kind of like people are so invested in what's going on in like the online space that like you said, it's an interruption. Like they go to your class and they're basically like they're online until they can't be, and then they're in your class for the whatever duration of the class it is, and then once it's over, they're back to that sort
Oh, my goodness,
of
it
lifestyle.
made it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now I can go on with my life. It's funny because the most interesting thing, the most valuable thing, the most valuable experience that I had in a class, I think it was 3 years ago, stemmed from a remark that I overheard one student making to another student before the class started. Um, and I mean, I've thought a lot about that remark, and I've talked to both students about it too. Um, Now I think I was so lucky that I overheard them talking before class. That wouldn't happen anymore.
Wow. So I guess the sort of a follow-up question to that. So just thinking about how much that the media landscape has changed, I'm curious if the students that come to your classes today, like what are the movies that they're familiar with? Like what is the kind of like common language between them? Because when I was in high school and coming into college, anybody that was interested in film was really obsessed with like all the people that came up in the 90s, like Christopher Nolan, David Fincher and Tarantino, Paul Thomas Anderson, all these people. Um, and I feel like that I don't have much like information for this, but I feel like that has probably changed over the past couple of years. So I'm curious if there's a different experience of like what the students that come to your class actually know before they come to your class.
I am sure that things have changed, but I'm probably not the best person to ask because you're going to get a serious overstatement from me about how much things have changed. Here it is. I said a minute ago that Hitchcock has dated, that he's now become very 20th century. And I
Hmm.
think, who was it? Susan Sontag said around 1970, movies, cinema is the art form of the 20th century. And when she
Hmm.
wrote that, it made a lot of sense. Now it still makes sense, but in a different way.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
definitely not the art form of the 21st century. And when
Hmm.
students come to my classes, they're basically studying what many of them regard as a dead art form. I mean, it may be an art
Hmm.
form that they really like, but it's not one that they're connected to on anything like an ongoing basis.
Hmm.
When I was in college, what everybody was interested in about movies was the auteur theory. Who directed
Right.
this film? Have you seen all of John Ford's westerns? And so
Hmm.
then I don't know, maybe 10 years or so after I started teaching here, I asked Harris Ross, what do you think? Students aren't really into auteurism anymore. What are they into? And he said, box office. That's what they talk about all the time. They all know how much the movie made last weekend. They know what place
Hmm.
it was in. They know whether it's gone, how much down it's gone over the past 3 weeks. They know how it's trending. They know how it compares
Hmm.
to earlier films in the franchise, and so on. And if you ask
Hmm.
me now, what do students know about movies? I would have to scratch my head and say, Julie, I'm really not sure what they know about movies, except that they're old and kind
Interesting.
of quaint.
Yeah, that's it breaks my heart to hear that, but that's kind of the answer I was expecting a little bit because the impression I get especially is the line between movie and like television and just kind of like the general blur of content that we have now is stronger than ever, and I feel like there's still people obviously watching what you would consider film if you're just thinking of it in terms of like moving images with synchronized audio, right? But they're getting like basically TV shows and movies that are being put on streaming services and stuff. They're still watching them, but the actual engagement with of film in the way that I feel like the, it was I guess it was even passe sort of when I was coming up and interested in those filmmakers and the auteur theory and all of that. But it feels like that very much now is starting to dissipate, especially since the most popular movies are very much like based on intellectual property and just like kind of it's the idea that sells more so than the people that are in it or the people that directed it. Um, and I think that's interesting. It's not unilateral. There definitely still are things where people are interested in the person, but it definitely does feel like it's significantly less than it was in the old days for sure.
I don't think, for instance, that most students are all that interested in stars.
Hmm.
I think that most students who are not really, really into film are not interested in more than a handful of filmmakers. Uh,
Hmm.
and I think that you put it very well. The most popular movies these days are franchise tentpoles. And
Mhm.
it's not that people are interested in the movie, they're more interested in the franchise. Uh,
Right.
how many Avengers movies have you seen? Did you notice the inconsistencies? It's almost
Mhm.
as if before you see the new franchise entry, you have to see all the old ones so that you can pass the entrance exam on the way in. And in
Yeah,
many
right.
ways, this is great because it really does encourage you to sharpen your mind and to watch critically.
Mhm.
It's just, it's a different great way to watch movies. I'll tell you a
Mhm.
story. 10, 15 years ago, students used to say to me, you know, you should really get a widescreen TV, a big screen TV for your house, because I had said many times I hate watching movies at home. I don't like watching movies on TV. I only like going to the movies to watch them. And everybody
Mhm.
said, well, you know, if you had a 40 or 50 or 60-inch TV, you'd feel better. So eventually I got a big screen TV. Didn't change my habits. I still didn't like
Mhm.
watching movies on it, although it did change the way I watched The Wire. It's so funny. We were able to turn on the English language subtitles midway through the second season of The Wire. For the first time, I realized what those people were talking about. It was a revelation. Anyway, um, I got a big screen TV. It did not change the way I watched movies, and I wanted to explain this to the students. But by that time, it didn't matter. Students weren't watching movies on big screen TVs anymore. They're watching them on their phones.
Mhm.
And the equivalent students to the ones who had said to me 5 years earlier, you don't get the full experience if you're not watching it on a big screen with a stereo sound 5.1. We're now saying, well, why would I want to watch on anything bigger than a 3-inch screen? You know, with my iPod buds hooked up so that I could watch it in my own time, under my own circumstances, and as
Mhm.
discontinuously as I wanted. And this
Mhm.
last part, I guess, I thought was the real dividing line between me and the students. That for me, watching movies had become a kind of quasi-religious experience.
Mhm.
You know, you tune into the movie, and if, by golly, if people in back of you are talking, you shush them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you would never walk out of a movie early.
Mhm.
I mean, that would be a blasphemous thing to do.
Mhm.
And now students are consuming movies, you know, in bite-sized portions. And I
Mhm.
have to admit, I've started to watch many movies this way too. I mean, I watch movies while I'm brushing my teeth. I'll watch 3 minutes of a movie and then turn it off. I'll watch 3 more minutes several hours later. So,
I seem to remember you, mentioning that we're watching Funny Games one time. That's
oh, what a nightmare! Yeah, I thought Funny Games remains after all these years the most unpleasant movie I've ever seen. And we had this conversation. I've seen the American remake.
Mhm.
That's also pretty awful, but the original film is worse.
Mhm.
And I foolishly thought, well, Funny Games, everybody says Funny Games is so terrifying. I will minimize the impact of it by only watching it in short doses while
Mhm.
I'm brushing or flossing my teeth. And the
Mhm.
result of that was to spread the terror over 5.5 days. What a terrible, terrible decision that was to make.
Well, honestly, you explaining that spreading the terror over 5.5 days is kind of like that's kind of in a funny way, sort of how I feel about television as a whole. Um, like I'm not like against the idea of the serialized TV show. I think it's interesting, and there have been shows that I like, but over time, I've really come to appreciate the singular experience of a movie where you start it, and then for whatever amount of time the movie is, it's just one kind of sustained experience that you have that has a beginning, middle, and end. And at the end of that experience, it's like you've seen the entire thing, you can reflect on it, and it feels like even that's kind of like I can only think of how many people wouldn't even touch like The Irishman, like the Martin Scorsese movie, because it's so long, and they just think like I can't sit through a movie this long. I would have to watch it in chunks. I'd have to do it that way. Um, and yeah, so obviously, like with a movie like Funny Games, that's much worse than watching a TV show over a couple of days. But in a way, I appreciate the how succinct a movie is in comparison to a serialized drama or something like that.
For me, the big difference is not succinctness, but closure.
Hmm.
My wife is really into serial TV. So when we watch together, which is most of the watching that I do, we're much more likely to watch long form TV
Hmm.
or episodic TV, you know, with a formula like Law and Order, for instance.
Sure.
It's very reassuring. It's the same thing every day. And I can get into that. But what I prefer, and this is another way that I'm old school, I think, I'm very Aristotelian, is a story with a beginning and a middle and an end. And I really
Mhm.
like it when I get the end and I think, ah, that's it.
Mhm.
It's over. And now I can
Mhm.
reflect on the whole thing. And
Mhm.
for me, continuing long form series, especially open ended series, are a nightmare because I never know when they're going to be over. And sometimes, when The Sopranos or when Mad Men ended, I thought, that's it. That's the ending. That's
Yeah,
all
I feel like that's the experience of the serialized drama in general. I don't think they ever end in a way where you feel like, "Ah, the ending. That was the ending that this should have had," you know? Like, I feel like a good ending always feels kind of inevitable, where it's like, when you think about it, you're like, this is the ending it needed to have. This is good." But a TV show, almost by just the nature of how complex and intricate they are and how long they go, it almost feels like that's kind of an impossible thing to pull off. And I don't know if I've ever seen a TV show that really has in a way that's been as satisfying as like a really great movie ending, you know?
Breaking Bad, I thought had a great ending.
It did. I think that's the closest that
Yeah,
I've seen.
when I watched it, I didn't think you called out an ending. I thought I knew that it was coming here. It's just that it took a long, long time
Yeah.
to get.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't
For
sorry that
sure.
it had taken a long time. I really enjoyed Breaking Bad, and I was sorry when it was over. But I did think
Oh yeah.
that's probably the best ending to a long form show I can think of.
No, yeah, I think I feel the same way, actually. That's kinda like the one show that is, like, the exception for my my ongoing kind of middle of the road feelings on TV.
I'm in the
But,
middle right now of watching Penny Dreadful. I'm not quite halfway through the second season, and I just found out that John Barry, the showrunner, planned the third season to be the last season, but didn't tell anybody else. So
mhm.
his idea was that, when the last segment of the third season was over, he said, "Okay, that's it, everybody. So long. Goodbye, good luck." And I'm very curious to see how I feel about that episode when I finally watch it. The
Mhm.
rate I'm going, it won't be anytime soon, but
Sure.
I live in hope.
So I wanna, like, we could you kinda touched on this a little bit, but just with especially with the COVID pandemic, there's been a lot of talk about movie theaters lately and what the role of movie theaters is in people's just kind of general entertainment media consumption life, and everybody is saying that the movie theaters are going to die because Warner Brothers just announced that they're putting so many of their movies on streaming services and everything. um, and there's a lot of filmmakers that are really upset about this, but I feel like the general, and it's just anecdotal, but just from seeing people's reactions, I've kind of gotten the sense that more or less people are okay with this. They're kind of like, I wouldn't mind watching something in my house instead of having to go to a theater all the time. And I've even seen like when Christopher Nolan got kind of upset when Warner's announced this. People are kind of like, "Oh, Nolan, you're just like you're so like you're hubris. You're you're an artist who's out of control. Like this is a good thing for people. Et cetera, et cetera." And it feels like people don't really have that kind of reverence for the movie theater experience that traditionally is something that filmmakers used to really push. So what do you think about this, like this shift that we're seeing now that may or may not be more or less indefinite as movie theaters start to be less and less important to people?
Well, a couple of things. First, yes, this shift is happening. We're not going to go back.
Mhm.
Second, it didn't happen as a result of what Warner's did. What Warner's did was a symptom, not a cause.
Mhm. Right.
Warner's will surely be followed by other studios. I don't know how long it'll take,
Mhm.
but I regard the decline of motion picture houses, of movie theaters, as very much like the decline of academic conferences. It was as
Mhm.
if people already were thinking of good reasons to not have them. And then lo and
Mhm.
behold, the pandemic came along, and now they had a terrific reason to not have them. So
Yeah.
instead of people jetting all over the world and feeling guilty about their carbon offsets, they could now stay home and Zoom. And the only problem was that the time zones were different. They had to plan.
Right.
So with movie theaters, people have been getting away from going to movie theaters, I think, for a while.
Right.
Box offices keep going up because theaters keep jacking up the prices, but attendance hasn't kept going up. And I think here, um, there it's complicated. There are a bunch of different reasons. One of them we've touched on already: the changing habits of student audiences, of young
Mhm.
people, who are just as invested in seeing a movie on their terms at their convenience as they are in seeing it under what you and I might think puristically are the perfect circumstances.
Mhm.
the widescreen, the stereo sound, and so on.
Mhm.
But another one, and this one, it took me a long time to get onto this, is when I was growing up, the reason that movies were basically directed at young people is that young people went on dates, and a movie
Mhm.
was the perfect date, or at least it was
Mhm.
the beginning of a perfect date.
Right. Yeah.
After the movie, you would have what Hitchcock called the icebox talk. Uh,
Mhm.
you'd get a drink, or you'd go out to dinner, or you'd get ice cream, or you'd go home and you'd talk about the movie. And
Right.
the complete experience was seeing the movie and then talking about the movie. And of course, if you were dating, you could always hope for still more of an experience after that.
Right.
Okay, what it took me a long, long time to realize is, by and large, young people don't date anymore. I mean, they get together socially, they
Mhm.
interact, they network, they hang with their peeps, they hook up. But um, going on a date seems to me not particularly a thing anymore, and therefore they
Mhm.
don't have to find things to do while they're on dates.
Mhm.
If they want to go somewhere, they go to a bar.
Mhm.
If they're old enough, or if they're almost old enough, or if they look old enough.
Mhm.
And if they can't do that, they either hang with their friends on social media, or they get
Mhm.
together and hang with their friends in person. They go to the mall, for instance. Uh,
Mhm.
so for all these reasons, I think the time for the decline of movie theaters was locked in before,
Yeah.
before COVID came along. COVID is just giving people, on the one hand, a realization, on the other hand, an excuse. And I'm sorry
Right.
about that, because I'm one of the people who really did like to go to movie theaters. Although I must say, there are a lot of things I miss about the last 9 months, but going to the movies would probably not crack the top 10.
I mean, I would feel the same way, but largely just because a lot of the movies that would have been coming out, I probably wouldn't have been that interested in seeing.
Yeah, that, of course, is part of the reason too. Having said
Uh,
all that, I have to say, I really feel sorry for Chris Nolan.
yeah,
um,
I do too.
people say to him, "Oh, Tenet, wonderful. It'll be just like Inception. It looks even more puzzling. It's more obscure. Make it longer, make it bigger, make it more expensive." And then when he does exactly what they say, "What? You want to put this on the widescreen? You're living in the old days, man." That's so unfair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I thought
No, it
I thought
wasn't
that was
his
really
fault. He
interesting.
did not concoct this witch's brew. What does interest me is the question of how he will adapt once
Yeah.
theaters have gone away.
Well, it's kind of a interesting thing with that. He, I know that he's been involved a lot lately with just kind of figures in the gaming community. And as far as I'm pretty sure he's done screenings of his movies like in certain video games. Like they'll in the virtual game world, there's like a movie theater screen set up and you watch Inception while you're in the world of the game or something like that.
Something
So
like
maybe there's gonna be some weird thing in the future where we're all watching movies in virtual worlds while in like video games, and
laughing at this, but this is not that much different from
yeah,
yours and my ideal experience of watching a movie already.
yeah,
I always used to say that one of the reasons I like to go to movie theaters was to get that oceanic feeling, that I would
yeah,
just sit back and the movie would roll over me and I would be
hmm,
powerless to resist it and I would surrender to it.
right,
Doesn't happen when I watch things on TV.
hmm,
But even though that was a great experience, and I do miss that experience, that's not the only great experience you can have while you're watching a movie.
hmm,
I mean, there are times when I read novels when I feel completely swept up and carried away by the novel, but there are plenty of times I read novels that I enjoy them a lot, that I'm not having that feeling.
hmm, yeah,
So yeah, not only am I curious about how people like Chris Nolan are going to make out, in this brave new world, but I'm interested in how I don't even want to say movie corporations, let's say media corporations will make out in this brave new world too. For instance,
hmm,
we still have opera.
hmm,
It's a coterie art. I mean, it's basically a dead art that's preserved by this very economically powerful but tiny niche audience. And
hmm,
interestingly, there are surveys continue to show that more young people get hooked on opera than get hooked on symphonic music.
hmm,
So orchestras' target audiences are dying, but opera's target audiences are being replenished to a greater extent.
hmm,
The same thing has happened with live theater.
sure,
New York has Broadway, but it would be hard to name three other cities in America that have a really hyperactive theater district, a theater
yeah,
life that the
yeah,
economy revolves around. Um, but theater still survives. It just survives as a coterie art, a niche art.
Mhm.
Is that what movies are headed toward? I would say that's where movies are already. It's
Yeah.
we haven't quite noticed it yet.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that we're kind of heading in that direction, but I feel like it's going to be one of those things that's always going to sustain because there's going to be people out there that are interested and passionate about it. And you already see that with like things like the Criterion Collection. Like the people are like devoted to these movies that they release and like the physical releases that they come out with of these classic films, and they do very well. Like they're a successful company. So I know that like, there's people that are always going to be there that are interested in seeing like old movies and just interested in the art form in general. But are we going to see, like the multiplex culture last for considerably longer? Probably not.
That I don't
Yeah.
think. And I also think
Yeah.
that people are not, I could be wrong about this because the way that we've been going, this niche culture, I'm not sure how much longer people are going to think of movies as an art form. Um, I wonder how much longer. I remember watching my daughter when she was in high school watch TV with a remote control in her hands, and she
Hmm.
changed the channel like every 15 seconds.
Hmm.
I found this nerve-wracking. First I asked her, "Aren't you afraid you're gonna miss something?" She said, "No, of course I'm not gonna miss anything. I know when to change the channel. I know I'm not gonna miss anything. This is not my first rodeo." And
Hmm.
finally I said, "Well, why would you wanna watch all these shows at once?" And she said, "Well, I've only got an hour to watch TV. Why would I spend it just watching one show when I could spend it watching 4 shows?" And I thought, God bless her, if she can get away with doing that, which I could not do, why not? It's a more efficient way to do it. So maybe instead of thinking of movies as an art form, people think of movies as, I don't know, a provision or I don't want to call it a background noise. I don't think of movies as audiovisual music exactly, but an affordance, a something that's there that you can draw on if you like, the way that,
Hmm.
for instance, before I discovered that my DVD player, when I put it on pause and then went away for 6 hours and turned it back on, would go on to the same place. That was a
Hmm.
remarkable moment in my life. Up until then, I'd been watching Turner Classic Movies.
Sure.
I brush my teeth, I turn on the movie. I had no idea what it was. I'd watch it for 2 minutes. And of course, in 2 minutes, you don't really get a lot of the plot.
No, definitely
There
not.
are a lot of interesting ways to watch movies without picking up the plot. Sometimes, of
Hmm.
course, it'd be a familiar movie, and I would think, "Oh yeah, right, I remember where this is." Other
Hmm.
times, I would think, "So, who are these actors exactly, and what are the characters trying to do?" I would try to guess what decade was this movie made. When I got really confident, I would try to guess, which filmmaker made it. Who does it look like?
Hmm.
Um, th- I think those are strange ways to watch movies. And as movie culture evolves, as audiovisual culture evolves, I think that we'll see new ways of watching movies that I really can't imagine right now. I'll be very
Hmm.
curious to see what those ways are and whether or not I can appreciate them, even if I can't share them.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we will see you next week for part 2.